The birthday cake. The funeral flowers were still wilting in my kitchen when I drove to Emma's house for the party. 3 days. That's how long David had been in the ground. 3 days since I'd stood in black wool under a merciless sun, shaking hands with people whose faces blurred together like watercolors in rain. 3 days since I'd become a widow at 34. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as I turned onto Maple Avenue. I shouldn't have come. Everyone had said so. My mother, my friends, even Emma herself in that careful voice she used when she wanted something, but knew better than to push. "Sophie, you don't have to come," she'd said on the phone that morning. "We'll understand. Jake will understand." But Jake was 7. My nephew had already lost his father, whoever that father was, years ago when Emma's marriage dissolved in a haze of recriminations and lawyers. He didn't need to lose his birthday too. And maybe, in some twisted way, I needed this. Needed to be around family. Needed to pretend that life continued, that children still turned 8, that balloons still floated and cake still had candles to blow out. I pulled into the driveway behind a silver Honda I didn't recognize. Emma's house was a modest ranch style in the suburbs. Nothing like the restored Victorian David and I had spent 5 years renovating together. Every shutter, every floorboard had been a battle we'd won as a team. Now it was just mine. Just a house full of his things and his absence. The front door was unlocked. I could hear children shrieking in the backyard, that particular frequency of joy that exists only before life teaches you why you should guard your happiness more carefully. "Sophie!" Emma appeared in the hallway, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, her smile too bright, too fixed. She moved toward me with her arms extended, and I let myself be hugged, breathing in her familiar scent of vanilla and fabric softener. "I'm so glad you came, really. It means everything." She held on too long. Her fingers pressed into my back with an urgency that made me stiffen. "Of course I came. Where's the birthday boy?" "Outside with the other kids. We're doing games before cake." Emma's eyes searched my face with an intensity that felt invasive. "How are you holding up?" Such an inadequate question. How was I holding up? I was a building with a collapsed foundation, walls still standing through sheer structural denial. I was awake at 3 in the morning, reaching across the bed for a body that would never be there again. Emma nodded slowly, and something flickered across her face. Was it pity? Guilt? Before I could identify it, she turned away. "Come on, everyone's in the back." I followed her through the house, past the living room where I'd spent countless evenings, past the kitchen where Emma and I used to drink wine and complain about our mother's unsolicited advice. Everything looked the same. The same beige walls, the same family photos, the same fake plant in the corner that Emma had bought to make the room feel more alive, but never watered because it didn't need it. The backyard was chaos in the best way. 10 or 12 children ran in scattered patterns, their games making sense only to them. Adults clustered in conversational groups near the fence, holding paper plates and plastic cups. I recognized most of them. Neighbors, friends from Emma's book club, her husband Marcus standing by the grill with a spatula in hand like a suburban warrior. And Jake, he was in the center of it all. His dark hair flopping as he ran, his laughter carrying above the rest. He looked so much like Emma had at that age. The same sharp features, the same way of moving with absolute confidence in his own invincibility. But something about him caught in my throat. The set of his jaw. The way he tilted his head when he concentrated. I'd seen those gestures 1,000 times before. No. I pushed the thought away violently, the way you push away a door that's opening onto something you're not ready to see. "Sophie." My mother materialized beside me, her perfume announcing her before her voice did. "Sweetheart, you look exhausted. Have you been sleeping?" "Not really, Mom." "You need to take care of yourself. David would want—" "Please, don't tell me what David would want." The words came out harder than I intended, sharp enough to make my mother flinch. Around us, conversations continued, but I felt the subtle shift in attention that comes when people pretend they're not listening to something uncomfortable. "Sorry," I said quickly. "I'm just—" It's a lot. My mother's hand found mine and squeezed. Her fingers were cold despite the summer heat. I know, baby, I know. But she didn't know. Nobody knew. Nobody knew about the phone I'd found in David's car after the accident, the one the police had handed me in a plastic bag with his wallet and watch. The phone I'd turned on, hoping for some message he'd meant to send, some final thought I could hold on to. Instead, I'd found messages. Hundreds of them. Years of them. Most were mundane, meeting times, grocery lists, complaints about work, but scattered throughout were others. Messages that made my skin crawl, that made me want to scrub my brain clean of what I'd read. Messages to my sister. Not all of them were sexual. That almost made it worse. There was an intimacy to the mundane ones that felt like a deeper betrayal than the explicit ones. Photos of his lunch, complaints about a difficult client, a joke about a TV show they'd both watched. We're watching the same shows, I'd thought, staring at the screen at 2 in the morning. When did they start watching the same shows? The most recent message was from 2 weeks before the accident, before the truck ran the red light and turned my husband into a closed casket and a flag folded into triangles. Jake's birthday is coming up. We need to talk about timing. Emma's response, I know. I'm working on it. Trust me. Trust. That word had haunted me through the funeral preparations, through the viewing where David's mother had sobbed into my shoulder, through the service where the pastor talked about a man I apparently hadn't known at all. Sophie? Emma was standing in front of me again, her expression concerned. You okay? You spaced out there for a second. I'm fine, just tired. Why don't you sit down? We're about to do the cake. She guided me to a chair at the long table that had been set up near the patio. Someone had decorated it with a superhero theme. Captain America and Iron Man on the tablecloth, matching plates and napkins. Jake loved superheroes. I'd bought him a vintage comic book for his birthday, had wrapped it carefully last week, when I could still pretend my life made sense. The gift was in my car. I'd forgotten to bring it in. Marcus started gathering the children, his voice booming good-naturedly over the chaos. All right, everyone, time for cake. Find a spot at the table. The kids thundered toward us like a sugar-driven stampede. Jake landed in the chair next to mine, his face flushed with exertion and happiness. Aunt Sophie, you came. He threw his arms around my waist, squeezing hard. Of course I came, buddy. Wouldn't miss it. I'm sorry about Uncle David, he said, pulling back to look at me with those serious eyes that seemed too old for 7, no, 8 now. Mom said he's in heaven. Heaven. The concept felt absurd. David had been a militant atheist, would have laughed at the idea of clouds and angels. But what was I supposed to say to a child? Yeah, I managed. He is. Jake nodded solemnly, then brightened as his mother appeared with the cake. A massive thing covered in blue frosting with edible superhero figurines positioned around it like a tiny plastic battle. Make a wish, baby, Emma called, her phone already out to capture the moment. Everyone started singing happy birthday, their voices blending into that slightly off-key chorus that happens when people who don't normally sing together tried to synchronize. I mouthed the words, watching Jake's face glow in the light of 8 candles. He closed his eyes. His lips moved silently, forming whatever wish 8-year-olds make. Then he blew, and the candles went out in a scatter of smoke and wax smell and applause. Speech! Speech! Someone called, one of Marcus's friends, already slightly drunk on whatever was in his red solo cup. Emma laughed, but there was something forced about it. Marcus, why don't you do the honors? But Marcus shook his head, stepping back. This is your show, Em. A weird moment of tension passed between them, something unspoken and uncomfortable. Then Emma straightened her shoulders and lifted her phone higher, and I realized with a sick twist in my stomach that she was recording. Actually, Emma said, her voice carrying across the yard with unexpected authority. Before we cut the cake, there's something I need to say, something important. The crowd quieted. Children fidgeted, impatient for sugar. Adults exchanged glances, curious but uncertain. Emma's eyes found mine across the table. In that moment, I saw it. The thing I'd been trying not to see. The guilt, the triumph, the fear. All of it mixed together into an expression I didn't recognize on my sister's face. Everyone here knows that Sophie just lost her husband. David was an amazing man. Complicated, but amazing. And he left behind a lot of love. My heart started pounding. This felt wrong. Everything about this felt wrong. What some of you don't know, Emma continued, her voice trembling slightly now, is that David also left behind something else. Someone else. She put her hand on Jake's shoulder. He looked up at her, confused, sensing the shift in atmosphere the way children do, that animal awareness that tells them when adult problems are about to crash into their world. Jake, Emma said, her voice breaking. Jake is David's son. The words hit like a physical blow. Around me, I heard gasps, murmurs, the rustle of people shifting uncomfortably. But all I could hear was the rushing in my ears, the sound of my blood pressure spiking, of my world tilting further off its axis. Emma! I started to stand, but my legs felt disconnected from my body. Let me finish. Emma's voice was stronger now, her free hand reaching into her pocket. I know this is a shock. Believe me, it wasn't easy to live with. But David and I, we had a relationship, a complicated one. It started years ago, before Marcus and I got together, before he married you, Sophie. Lies. They had to be lies. Except I'd seen the messages. I'd seen the timeline in those digital breadcrumbs. And Jake, God, Jake was 7, almost 8. I'd married David 8.5 years ago. The math was brutal and precise. David wanted to do right by his son. She pulled a folded envelope from her pocket, held it up like evidence in a trial. Before he died, he had his lawyer draw up papers, a new will, one that acknowledges Jake as his heir. I found my voice, though it came out strangled. This isn't the time or place. When would be the right time, Sophie? Emma's eyes flashed. At the reading of the will? In front of lawyers? I thought family should hear it from family. Jake deserves to know who his father was, and he deserves what his father wanted him to have. She opened the envelope, pulled out papers that looked official, stamped, notarized, real. My vision blurred around the edges. According to these documents, dated 2 weeks before the accident, David left Jake 50% ownership of the house on Willow Street. Your house, Sophie, the one you renovated together. It's worth approximately $800,000, which means Jake, she paused, squeezed his shoulder again, which means my son is entitled to $400,000 in equity. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the children had stopped fidgeting, sensing that something terrible was happening, even if they couldn't understand what. I looked at Jake. His face had gone pale, his eyes wide with confusion. He looked at his mother, then at me, then at his hands, folded in his lap. I'm sorry, he whispered. I didn't know. This isn't your fault, baby, Emma said quickly, kneeling beside his chair. None of this is your fault. But she looked at me when she said it, and I understood. This wasn't just a revelation. This was a claim. This was my sister looking me in the eye and telling me that my grief, my loss, my marriage, all of it was negotiable. All of it was property to be divided. I stood. The chair scraped against the patio concrete with a sound like a scream. Sophie, my mother reached for me, but I pulled away. You did this at his birthday party. You used your son's birthday party to tell me you're taking my house. Not taking, Emma said, standing too. Jake is entitled to what his father wanted him to have. This isn't about you and me. It's about what David wanted. What David wanted? The laugh that came out of me was ugly, jagged. David wanted to fuck his wife's sister and then leave his secret kid half a house? That's what he wanted? Sophie! My mother's voice was sharp with shock. But I couldn't stop. The dam had broken, and everything I'd been holding back, the grief, The rage, the humiliation came pouring out. Did you know? I spun on my mother. Did everyone know except me? Was I the only idiot who thought my marriage was real? Nobody knew, Emma said quietly. Just David and me. And Marcus, she added, glancing at her husband, who stood frozen by the grill, his face unreadable. I told Marcus before we got married. He knew Jake wasn't his biological son. Marcus nodded slowly, confirming it. I didn't know it was David specifically until later, but I knew. How noble, I spat. How very modern and understanding of you. I looked around at all the faces, friends, family, strangers. They were all watching me fall apart, watching me lose everything in real time. And still, Emma stood there holding those papers, her hand on Jake's shoulder, like she was the victim in the scenario, like she was the one protecting her child from a dangerous world. You could have told me privately, I said, my voice dropping to something more dangerous than shouting. You could have called me, met me somewhere. Anything but this. Would you have listened? Emma's eyes were wet now, tears tracking down her cheeks. Would you have accepted it without a fight? I needed witnesses, Sophie. I needed people to see that this is real, that these documents are real, that Jake's claim is legitimate. So you ambushed me at a child's birthday party. 3 days after I buried my husband, I gave you 3 days to grieve him as yours. But he wasn't just yours. He was Jake's father. He was mine too, in a way. I've been grieving too, Sophie. I just couldn't show it. The audacity of it hit me like a slap. She wanted sympathy. She wanted me to understand her pain, her loss, her complicated grief over a man she'd stolen from me before I'd ever really had him. Get out, I said. Emma blinked. What? I turned and walked. I made it through the house, through the front door, to my car before the tears came. They came hard and fast, blurring the windshield, making it impossible to see the road. I sat there crying in Emma's driveway while 8-year-old children sang party songs in the backyard, and my sister cut cake and served it to people who would go home and tell this story over their own dinner tables. The widow who didn't know. The sister who was secretly the mistress. The child caught in the middle. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. Come back inside. We need to talk about this like adults. Like adults. As if there was an adult way to handle discovering your entire marriage was a lie. As if there was a mature response to your sister claiming half your house because she'd been sleeping with your husband since before you'd even said your vows. Another text. This one from Emma. I'm sorry it had to be this way, but Jake deserves to know his father. And David wanted to provide for him. Please try to understand. I deleted them both. Then I pulled up my contact list and scrolled to a name I hadn't called in years. Richard Morrison, the lawyer David and I had used when we bought the house. He answered on the third ring. Sophie, I was so sorry to hear about David. How are you holding up? Richard, I need you to look at some documents. Can you meet me tomorrow? Of course. What kind of documents? A will. One I didn't know existed. There was a pause. I see. Sophie, I should tell you, David did contact me a few weeks ago. He asked about updating his will. My blood went cold. And I told him he needed to discuss it with you first, that any major changes to estate documents involving property you own jointly would require your signature, or at least your knowledge. He said he'd think about it. Did he come back? Did he file anything? Not with me, but Sophie, there are other lawyers. If he wanted to do something without you knowing, he could have gone somewhere else. Yes. I closed my eyes. The will Emma has. Could it be real? It could be, but it might not be legally binding, depending on how it was executed and whether proper procedures were followed. You need to see the original document, not just a copy. And you need to verify it was properly witnessed and notarized. She showed it at my nephew's birthday party, in front of a dozen witnesses. Richard was quiet for a moment. That's unusual. Sophie, whatever's going on here, don't make any decisions or sign anything until we've reviewed everything carefully. This sounds complicated. Complicated. The word of the day. I thanked him and hung up on the phone, then sat in my car as the sun started to sink lower, casting long shadows across the suburban street. Through the windows of Emma's house, I could see movement, people gathering their things to leave. The party was ending. I should go home. I should go back to that house, full of David's things, and try to figure out what was real. But the thought of walking through those rooms, of seeing the bookshelf he'd built, the chair where he'd read the newspaper every Sunday morning, the bed we'd shared, it was too much. Instead, I drove to my mother's house. She was already home when I arrived, her car in the driveway, the porch light on. She opened the door before I could knock. "Oh, baby," she said, and pulled me inside. We sat at her kitchen table, the one where I'd done homework as a child, where I'd told her about my first kiss, where David had asked her blessing before proposing. She made tea I didn't drink and held my hand while I told her everything. The phone, the messages, the years of lies. "Did you suspect?" I asked finally. "Ever?" My mother looked old in that moment, older than her 63 years. Sometimes I thought Emma looked at David strangely, but I told myself I was imagining things. Sisters don't do that to each other. Except they do. Except they do, she agreed quietly. She said it started before we got married, before David and I even met, maybe. Does that make it better or worse? I don't know, honey. I don't think there's a scale for this kind of hurt. I laughed, but it came out as a sob. She wants half my house, Mom. She wants me to pay for David's betrayal. And she did it in front of everyone, so I couldn't say no without looking like the monster who's denying a child his inheritance. That will might not be valid. But what if it is? What if David really did this? What if in his last weeks, he decided that Jake deserved half of everything I've worked for? What does that say about how he felt about me? My mother didn't have an answer. We sat in silence, drinking cold tea and watching night fall through the kitchen window. My phone rang. Emma. I sent it to voicemail. She called again. And again. Finally, I answered. "What?" "Sophie, please don't hang up. I need to explain." "Explain what?" "How you've been sleeping with my husband for a decade? How you decided to drop this bomb at your son's birthday party? I'm all ears, Emma." "It wasn't like that." "What was it like then? Enlighten me." She took a shaky breath. "David and I had a relationship before you met him. We were together for about 6 months. It was intense, but messy. We fought constantly. When we broke up, I thought that was it. Then, a year later, you brought him to Thanksgiving dinner, and I realized you were dating him. You were in love with him. And you didn't think to mention you'd already fucked him?" My mother winced at the language, but didn't interrupt. "I thought about it," Emma said. "But you were so happy. Happier than I'd seen you since Dad died. And David and I were over. I thought it didn't matter. But you kept sleeping with him. Not right away. That came later, after he proposed to you. He called me one night, drunk, saying he'd made a mistake, that he'd proposed to the wrong sister. The words were knives, each one finding a new place to cut. I told him to sober up and forget my number," Emma continued. "I really did try, Sophie. For months, I avoided family gatherings, made excuses. But then at my wedding, I couldn't breathe. You fucked him at my wedding? Not at the wedding, after, weeks after. He showed up at my apartment saying he couldn't stop thinking about me, that marrying you was the biggest mistake of his life. And God, Sophie, I know how this sounds. I know I'm the villain here, but I loved him. I'd loved him before you even knew he existed. So that makes it okay? Love makes betrayal acceptable? No, nothing makes it okay. But it's the truth. We tried to end it a dozen times, but we kept coming back to each other. And when I got pregnant, Jesus Christ, Emma, you got pregnant on purpose? No, it was an accident. I was on birth control. It just happened. And when I told David, he was terrified. But he was also happy. He wanted to be a father. You two had been trying for a while by then. How do you know that? Silence. He told you about our fertility struggles, about the miscarriages? Sophie, he told you everything? While I was grieving our lost babies, he was telling you about it, probably in bed, probably right after. I hung up. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. My mother pulled me into her arms, and I sobbed into her shoulder the way I used to as a child, but there was no comfort in it now. I wasn't a child, and she couldn't fix this. What do I do? I whispered. Mom, what do I do? Tomorrow, you talk to the lawyer, she said firmly. You find out if that will is real and if it's binding. You protect yourself. And Emma? Emma made her choices. Now she has to live with them. But it wasn't that simple. It was never that simple with family. I spent that night at my mother's house, in my old childhood bedroom with its faded wallpaper and shelves full of participation trophies and yearbooks. I lay awake until dawn, thinking about all the moments I'd missed, all the signs I should have seen. David coming home late and smelling like perfume I didn't wear, Emma canceling plans at the last minute, the way they never stood too close at family gatherings, like they were afraid their bodies would betray them. And Jake, sweet, innocent Jake, who looked more like David than I'd ever wanted to admit. The same nose, the same way of tilting his head when he concentrated, the same laugh. How many times had I commented on it? Jake looks so much like David did at that age, I'd said once, looking at childhood photos. Emma had smiled tightly and changed the subject. I thought it was coincidence. Families blend features in unexpected ways. I'd never imagined the truth was so much simpler and so much more horrible. At 8 in the morning, I called Richard's office. His secretary put me through immediately. Sophie, I've been thinking about your situation all night, he said. I did some research. If David had a will drawn up without your knowledge involving property you own jointly, there are grounds to contest it. But I need to see the actual document. Emma has it. Can I just take a picture? Better to get the original, or at least a certified copy. Where did she say it came from? She didn't. Just that David's lawyer drew it up. I'll make some calls. There are only a handful of estate attorneys in town who David might have used. Someone will have a record if this is legitimate. And if it is legitimate, then we fight it. Joint property can't be disposed of unilaterally. Even if David wanted Jake to inherit his portion, there are procedures. He couldn't just cut you out. Unless he could. Unless there was a loophole I didn't know about. My law degree was in corporate litigation, not estate law. I was out of my depth. What should I do today? I asked. Don't contact Emma, don't sign anything, don't make any statements about your intentions. Let me handle this professionally. I agreed, but as soon as I hung up, my phone rang again. Unknown number. Hello? Mrs. Mitchell, this is Gregory Saunders. I'm an attorney representing Emma Thorne. She's asked me to reach out to you regarding the estate matter. My stomach dropped. She'd already hired a lawyer. This was real. This was happening. I don't have anything to say to you, I said. My attorney will be in touch. Of course, I just wanted to provide you with copies of the relevant documents and schedule a mediation session. My attorney will be in touch. I hung up and immediately called Richard back. Emma's lawyer just called me. Gregory Saunders. Do you know him? Unfortunately, yes. He's aggressive and expensive. This means Emma is serious about pursuing this. Can she win? That depends on the validity of the will and about a dozen other factors. But Sophie, this is going to get ugly. Are you prepared for that? Was I? Was I prepared to fight my sister in court? To air our family's dirty secrets in depositions and hearings? To sit across from Emma in a conference room and watch her argue that she deserved half of everything I'd built? Yes, I heard myself say. I'm prepared. But I wasn't. Not really. The next few weeks were a blur of legal meetings and document reviews. Richard obtained a copy of the will Emma claimed David had signed. It looked legitimate. Proper signatures, notarization, witness statements. David had gone to a lawyer in the next town over, someone neither Richard nor I had heard of. He told this lawyer that he had a son from a previous relationship and wanted to ensure the boy was provided for. The lawyer apparently had never asked if David's wife knew about this plan. It's not technically illegal, Richard explained. David had every right to dispose of his portion of the property as he saw fit. The problem is proving which portion was his and which was yours. We'd bought the house together, both names on the deed. But I'd paid for most of the renovations with money from my job. David had been in between careers at the time, finding himself in a way that now seemed like code for meeting my sister in cheap hotels. We can argue that the increased value of the property was due to your solo investment, that David's portion is limited to the original purchase price. It was something. It wasn't enough. Emma's lawyer sent demand letters. I sent letters back. We scheduled mediation. Then Emma canceled. My mother tried to play peacekeeper and ended up alienating both of us. And through it all, I had to go to work, had to smile at colleagues who'd been at the funeral, had to pretend that my world hadn't imploded in the span of a few terrible minutes at a child's birthday party. I saw Emma once during this time, accidentally, at the grocery store. We turned the corner into the same aisle, me from the left, her from the right. For a second, we just stared at each other, shopping carts between us like barricades. She looked terrible. Thin, pale, dark circles under her eyes. Good, I thought viciously, then hated myself for thinking it. Sophie, she started. I turned and walked away, left my cart in the middle of the aisle and walked out of the store without buying anything. That night, she texted me. I never wanted it to be like this. I thought we could work something out. You're still my sister. I typed and deleted a dozen responses. Finally settled on, you stopped being my sister when you slept with my husband. Her response came immediately. He was mine first. And maybe that was the core of it. Maybe in Emma's mind, she had claimed to David based on temporal priority. First come, first served, even in matters of the heart. But marriage was supposed to mean something. Those vows we'd taken, they were supposed to be a line in the sand, a boundary that family didn't cross. Except Emma had crossed it, over and over again, for years. And David had let her. The mediation finally happened on a Tuesday in October, 3 months after the funeral. We sat in a conference room with bland art on the walls and a view of the parking lot. Emma was on one side with Gregory Saunders. I was on the other with Richard. A mediator sat at the head of the table, a woman in her 50s with the kind of neutral expression that came from years of watching families destroy each other over money. Let's begin, she said. Miss Thorne, would you like to present your position? Emma's lawyer did most of the talking. He laid out the case cleanly. David Mitchell had executed a valid will, leaving 50% of the property at 1247 Willow Street to his son, Jake Thorne. The property was jointly owned by David and his widow, Sophie Mitchell. Therefore, David's portion was his to dispose of as he wished. Jake, as the beneficiary, was entitled to his inheritance. The will was properly executed, properly witnessed, and clearly expresses Mr. Mitchell's intentions, Saunders concluded. There's no legal basis to contest it. Richard countered with our position. The property's value had increased significantly due to Sophie's sole financial investment. David's portion should be calculated based on the original purchase price, not the current value. Furthermore, there were questions about whether David had been mentally competent when he signed the will, given that he died shortly after in a traumatic accident. Are you alleging that David Mitchell was mentally unsound? Saunders asks sharply. I'm suggesting that a man who knew he had a secret child for 7 years and suddenly decided to memorialize that secret in his will weeks before dying might have been under unusual stress or duress. That's absurd. Gentlemen, the mediator interrupted. Let's keep this productive. Miss Thorne, would you like to address the room? I looked at Emma for the first time since we'd sat down. She met my eyes, and I saw it again. that mixture of guilt and defiance. I want to know why. Not from your lawyer, from you, Emma. Why did you do this at Jake's birthday party? Why did you humiliate me in front of everyone we know? Emma's jaw tightened. I told you I needed witnesses. Bullshit. You wanted to hurt me. You wanted to punish me for having what you couldn't keep. That's not true. Then what is true? I leaned forward. Tell me the truth, Emma. Just once. Did you love him, or did you just love taking him from me? She flinched. I loved him. I've always loved him. More than you loved me? That's not fair. None of this is fair. My voice cracked. You were my sister, my only sister. We were supposed to be on the same team, and you spent years lying to my face, sleeping with my husband, having his child, and now you're taking my house? So tell me, Emma, was it worth it? Tears streamed down her face, but she didn't look away. He loved me too. You need to understand that. He loved you, but he loved me differently. First, more deeply. The words should have hurt. Maybe they would have a few months ago. But I'd cried so much, hurt so much, that I'd found something beyond pain. A clarity that comes when you've lost everything and realized you're still standing. You know what I think? I said quietly. I think David didn't love either of us. I think he loved the game, the secret, the thrill of having two lives. And I think you were so desperate to be chosen that you settled for being the one he hid. Emma's lawyer cleared his throat. Perhaps we should take a break. No. I stood. We're done here. Richard, tell them we'll see them in court. Sophie. Emma reached across the table toward me, but I pulled away. You want the house? Fight me for it. But don't expect me to make it easy. And don't ever expect me to forgive you. I walked out of the mediation, out of the building, into the October afternoon that smelled like dying leaves and gasoline. Richard caught up with me in the parking lot. That was risky. We could have negotiated a settlement. I don't want a settlement. I want justice. Sophie, justice and the legal system don't always align. Then I want revenge, he sighed. That I can work with. The case went to trial the following spring. It took 8 months from the birthday party to the courtroom. 8 months of discovery and depositions and sleepless nights. I learned things I didn't want to know. Emma and David had been together on my birthday, on my anniversaries, in my house when I was out of town for work. They had their own traditions, their own private jokes, their own life that existed in the shadows of mine. And Jake, poor Jake, who'd been told his whole life that his father was Emma's ex-husband, that deadbeat who'd walked away, then suddenly his dead father was actually his uncle, and his mother was in court fighting his aunt over money, and he was the reason for it all. My mother testified. She said Emma had always been troubled, always jealous of me. Emma's lawyer objected, but the damage was done. Emma testified too. She told the whole story, every detail, her voice shaking but clear. She admitted to the affair, admitted to lying for years, but she insisted that Jake deserved what David had wanted him to have. I testified last. I told my story too. The good years with David, the fertility treatments, the miscarriages, the phone I'd found with its load of secrets, the funeral where I'd mourned a man who'd never really been mine. Did you love your husband? My lawyer asked. Yes. Do you still? I looked at the jury, 12 faces trying to untangle this mess. I love who I thought he was, but that person never existed. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they came back, the forewoman read the verdict. The will was valid. David had every right to leave his portion of the property to his son. However, David's portion was determined to be 30% of the property value, not 50%, due to Sophie's documented financial contributions to renovations and improvements. Jake would get 30%. I would keep 70%. It was something. It wasn't victory. Emma cried when the verdict was read. Her lawyer patted her shoulder professionally, already thinking about the appeal he'd file. But I felt numb. Even in death, David had managed to take from me. 30% of my home would have to be liquidated or bought out. I'd have to either sell the house I'd poured my heart into or pay her to buy out Jake's share. The house sold 3 months later. I couldn't afford to buy Emma out, and staying there with David's ghost and betrayal in every wall was killing me anyway. I bought a condo across town, something modern and soulless and mine. No history, no shared memories, just blank walls waiting for whatever came next. Jake got a check for $240,000, held in trust until he turned 18. Emma got to be the mother who'd fought for her son's inheritance. And I got to be the bitter ex-wife who'd tried to deny a child what his father wanted him to have. That's how the story got told, anyway. At family gatherings, I stopped attending. In whispered conversations I wasn't meant to hear. My mother tried to repair the rift between Emma and me, but some things can't be fixed. Some betrayals cut too deep. We were civil when forced to be in the same room, and we avoided being in the same room. I threw myself into work, into my career, into becoming the kind of person who didn't need anyone. I went to therapy. I learned words like betrayal trauma and complex grief. I started, slowly, to rebuild a life that didn't have David-shaped holes in it. 3 years later, I got a message from an unknown number. Just a link, no text. I clicked it hesitantly and found a wedding website. Emma and Marcus had finally gotten married in some kind of official ceremony. Apparently, their first wedding hadn't felt authentic since Emma had been pregnant with another man's child at the time. I stared at the smiling photo of them, at the details of the ceremony, at the registry link asking for money toward their honeymoon. Then, I closed the browser and deleted the message. Some endings don't have resolution. Some families don't heal. Some betrayals are too big to be forgiven, no matter how much time passes. But I was still here, still standing, still building something from the rubble of what I'd lost. And maybe that was its own kind of victory. I'd survived the worst thing I could imagine, and I'd survived the knowledge that the people I'd loved most had been the ones to hurt me deepest. I'd survived it all. And that, I decided, was enough. That had to be enough.